supporting African community, and we're going to discuss how we can help the community move forward. We'll look into different aspects of our cultures, our traditions, the positives and the negatives. We're going to have loads and lots of subjects that we're going to talk about. And for today's subject, it is what does it mean to be an African woman? I chose this particular subject to start with because I feel like there's not enough support, or there's not enough push, support and acknowledgement of African women around the world. So in general, we would say an African woman is a woman who was born and raised in Africa. Therefore, she knows the culture, she knows the cultures, the traditions, the language, the maternal language, and she respects and takes pride in it. But what about the children? What about the women, the young children who are born outside of Africa? Where does this leave them? Okay, so I would like to discuss with you, my audience, so please do join us in the discussion, and we're going to talk about how can we support our children take pride in their African heritage. Because I found throughout the years, ever since I moved out of Africa, I found that children who are born and raised here, they spend quite a lot of their childhood trying to hide and refusing their African heritage. It takes them until their mid-teenage years to early adulthood to accept and admire the African cultures and tradition. And that's because mostly there's such a negative view on being African around the world. There's always this negative thing with being an African person, let alone an African woman. So I want to dedicate this to all our children who are born and raised here, outside Africa, in Europe, in the Western world, so they can start taking more pride, they can start having more pride in who they are and appreciating their heritage and the cultures and traditions. Another thing, so forgive me, I'm looking at my notes here just so I don't lose my points. Before I tell you what I think, what an African woman is, I'm going to talk a bit about the struggles, about the positives and the negatives of being an African woman. So the positive ones, we are strong. I think African women are strong, are resilient. They're in charge. They take charge of their life. They have so much strength, and that is rooted in our culture. And somehow I still feel like the world, sees African women as less than. We should, we're underestimated. I feel that we're underestimated at the things that we're capable, in our capability. I would like to, we're going to talk about education and the culture and where this strength that is embedded in us come from. So in Africa, it's believed, like generally people believe that women were always less than. However, that's not what history tells us. If you do a bit of research and you look at the history of African women, we were never less than men in cultures, or like we are seen as now at the moment. The gender discrimination started with the colonial era. During the colonial era, that was really reinforced, gender discrimination was really enforced during the colonial era. Before that, women could be chiefs of tribes, they could be generals in military, and they were really respected. And, they were queens and kings through their own rights. This wasn't just, for no reason. Through their own rights, we earned it. Through our own rights, we had power, we were respected. I remember watching a video where, this was on Facebook, it was just a random video that turned up, and there was a man, it was a short documentary where a man was explaining how women were appreciated, in old African tradition. Women were very well respected and appreciated. They said, men wouldn't make any decision before consulting with their wives in the community, because we will do the hard work, we did the agriculture. Because of our knowledge of plants, we were able to, tell men or educate men and other people in the community what plants were good for you, what plants were good to use for medication. So mainly he was basically telling, explaining that men wouldn't do anything before consulting with women. However, when colonialism came or arrived in Africa, that changed drastically. Women lost power, and since then, even after Africa gained their independence, African country gained their independence, we're still fighting. Women are still fighting to get their rights, to have their human rights, and there's a lot of crimes and abuse and all sorts of bad things that happen to African women in the community, and everything is just overlooked. However, we're so strong, and we actually hold the communities together. We raise family no matter what status you are, whether you're rich or poor. I grew up in a household where my mom, when things started going wrong with my dad, my mom picked up the pieces without complaining. She really moved the family forward. She did everything she could to survive. She was running a designing business. She was making clothes, and through her business, I saw women from all walks of life, coming in. There were women who were well educated or come in and they were able to make clothes, and I saw them as beautiful and strong. And also there were women who didn't get the chance to have that education. However, they were able to support their families, and most of the time these were single women who had small children, and they had to support the family. And they worked so hard, even without the education. They worked extremely hard, selling food and caring for their children, walking for miles and miles for those who didn't afford transport. They had to walk from place to place selling food so they can support their families. So even through hardship, African women are known to be strong and come out smiling either way, no matter what life throws at them. So my question is, why is it that even if we're so strong and so smart and so intelligent, African women are undervalued all over the world? My goal is to help us change that narrative. I want people to start changing the way they see, the way they look at African women, and I want people to be part of this change. I want everyone to be part of this change. Whether you're a stay-at-home mom or you work full-time, African women they just thrive at everything they do. I say this because I have examples. I've got my mom, my aunts, my sisters. I know so many strong women out there, African women, and yet we're still looked as less than, and we're really, we're not well appreciated in the community. Let's talk about education. There's been for whatever reason, throughout the years, women, girls, young girls were believed not to be able to have, parents wouldn't want to give them education because it seems like a waste of time, waste of resources, because they will marry. And I want that narrative to change. It's already changing, of course. I'm not going to say that's not changing and things are different, but the number of women, educated women, African women, is still quite less than the number of men, well-educated men in Africa as well as abroad. So we need to start changing that view that girls, young girls, and women in African community are less worthy than the men. They don't deserve to get an education because at certain points their job is to get married and have children and look after the family at home. Not that is a bad thing, but we can also encourage young girls that education is good and it can also take you further. In some cultures, not all of them, there are issues of child marriage in our African communities, and it's something that I watched a documentary a couple months ago where governments they're fighting against it, but there's not much reinforcement in that law. So in rural areas, in some countries in rural areas, the child marriage is something that is still going on, where a young girl is less worth than a cow or whatever animals that the family or the farmer is looking after. Like a parent will give their young girl, once they get to like 12, 13 years old, they'll give them away for marriage. And it's quite heartbreaking because they feel like she's not worth it unless I marry her off and I can get some money, or I can get some animals to look after for my farm and make some money. Unfortunately, trying to change that narrative is something that is taking a while, but we're working on it, and I'm quite happy about that. But there are other things that I think, certain pressures that we as women as well, throughout the years we believed, that our job is to grow up, get married, and have children. There's always been that pressure in women, and obviously it's not just African women. I see it also in other communities outside African cultures. The value of women is to, unless you get married and you have children, then, you're never good enough. So it's something that we need to change because we are more than that. And I want us to start appreciating and pushing that narrative a bit more, that to children, and without losing our culture. There's also fear that by doing that somehow we're gonna lose the values of our particular African cultures. That's not what we want. That's not what I want, because your culture is your identity, is who you are, is where you come from, your parents, your grandparents, and so on, so on. I don't think we should obviously get rid of the culture because we want to move on. I truly believe that we can move on, but we can get rid of these negative stereotypes that don't value women or don't push women forward. So there's been a rise of women in politics in certain African countries. It's becoming more and more common now. Governments around African countries are trying to change the presence of parliament, like the presence of women in high positions. So this is definitely a positive thing to see. It's nice to see young girls who can look at ministers or government bodies, high government bodies, who are female just like them, and give them the hope that they too can go to school, they can study, and with that as well, you can still manage to get married and have children and have all that. It is possible to combine these two things. The quality of life, however, the abuse and minimization of African women is something that even throughout the continent is still, like domestic violence, for example, against women in Africa is something that although people know it's bad, no one really takes steps to change, or there are no consequences for the abusers. There's never anything. There's a belief in our cultures that if a woman is being abused by a husband, well, it's her husband. So you're not allowed to. There's a belief where women are better off just staying married, no matter what's happening in a marriage, just endure the abuse and everything, because it's more shameful to divorce or leave your husband and go back to your parents. So throughout this kind of narrative, African women have had to endure this kind of violence towards them, and I want these kind of things, this kind of belief to change. I remember a few years ago, and this was here in Europe as well, in England, a lady, a friend of us, a lady we knew for many, many years, she was being abused by her husband. And obviously, she separated, she let him go and stuff. And after a bit, he started asking to come back. And she wouldn't let him back. But it was her other female friends, these are women, grown women, who will tell her, even if he hits you, he's still your husband. So there's that kind of belief, like people know it's not right. We all know it's not right, but these things still happen. But there's no consequences towards it. Nothing is done. So we need to start changing this, and I ask the men in our community to please start supporting and protecting the women. If you see your fellow friend, your fellow male doing that to the wife or whatever, please try to stop it, educate it somehow. We need to support and change these negative things that we believe, or is kind of embedded in our culture. But there's a lot more positivity with being an African woman. I think we're intelligent, we are strong, like I said before, and we can do so much more. We've got so much potential, only if we're given the chance to be able to do these things and not looked as less than, Give us a chance to be educated. Give us a chance to make our own decisions and not be frowned upon. There's so much positivity. We bring so much happiness to the homes. I know a lot of moms, aunties, sisters. We bring so much happiness into a home. We actually form the family, and we are behind the man, dealing with things. Even though we're on the background, we are doing something, and we keep the family, we hold the families together. So I know, for me, African women are strong, intelligent. We've got so much potential, and we can, we can go through hardship and survive and still come out on the other side smiling. Anyways, this is going towards the end of this session. Please don't forget to add your comments. If you want to comment on anything, please write it down, and we'll read it on our next section. And I'm going to try and read all the comments. And please tell me of you, what do you think as an African woman, or if you're not from an African background, do ask your fellow African friends, if you do have any, ask them what is it for you to be, what is it for them to be an African woman? What does it mean? What does it mean to be an African woman? I've got here a very beautiful poem about African women, and this poem is written by Wayne Visser. I'm not sure if it's Visser or Visser. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name properly, but I'm going to read this poem. It's quite long. I'm only going to read a few verses because it's really, really long. So here we are. It is called Women of Africa. So, women of Africa, in the land of bow and spear, of chieftain and warrior, of hunter and hunted, you are the silent gatherer, the unsung provider, the hidden basket. We raise you up and speak your praise. In the shifting sands of power, you are the pyramid of consistency, standing firm against the fierce winds of time. On the endless plains of possibility, you are the gentle matriarch, leading the way through the fickles of the season of life. In the thirsty dust of desperation, you are the baobab of sustenance, rooted deep in the quenching earth of faith. You gather the tears of the world, and in the midst of the mourning, you find reason to smile. You gather the tribes of the world, and in the chaos of squabbling, you sow seeds of community. So this is where I'm going to end this session. I hope you guys have enjoyed my little piece in African Woman. And please do leave your comments, and we will continue the discussion and the comment session. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Shop ya design ya mafala diso ya na mabasi deline kaka ndenge kuna donc propre d'abord awa basala ba ko nyonso ba décoration ba musique kai ko ni ba tiela yo na cadre na ba versatilité ba ko salela yo ba ko salela ba photo ba scène na ndako ba message public au sein de ça ba ko salela ba t-shirt ba polo. Dans l'anniversaire, dans l'événement, sur conférence, convention, on y va ça et là, publicité, la t-shirt, la possède, la prime qui est, pour moi, bazar la scène, mais la prime abordable, on a besoin au bout à banquer. Parce que kaka awa nyonso, bazar la paix va pas na oi. Monso, donc on va rester une grosse télévision na studio na yo. On a shop na yo kaka pona publicité ya shop na yo bakitomba sokuta bazomona makamili oyo tosala kati ya business na yo oza na restaurant oza na shop na yo oza na studio même na kati église ou bien oza na événement na mariage okoki koya efa vie de design bakosala yo bana oyo kunene oyo kele miso kaka na très bon ba bato bazomona mafotisa baza mpe na service photocopie olingo imprimé lettre olingo mpe ya photocopie ya lettre oye ana fi de design okala pesite photo eza photo ya birthday wow I love this one otala bino nde badekore awa peza mwana soki akomi awa mwana soki akomi awa omona binele ezalgo na paradis oyo oza na birthday ya bana benga mama Fideline banimero ekoleka na baekran na bino okontakte bango na papa Hubert bakoyebisa yo lolenge nini yo kosala badeta nini mpona oya amona kosepela apidoi nzambe apambola bino boza oya ebele baza na kati ya boto adresse mpe koleka wana na baetando na bino kala mingi te oza na Manchester oza na Bolton oza na Angleterre na mboka yosika na États-Unis yo pesaka commande na yo papa Hubert na mama Fideline bazala bakokonasela commande on a pas mona voilà tasi ate osoyamba bapaya na yo olingi batiela yo ou bien photo na bino ou bien message moko boye eza kitoko makasi kitoko oza vraiment welcome oza le bienvenu ya koya kotuna ba détail nyonso